Hello and welcome to Learning and Technology. My name's Frank and I'm glad that you're here. In this video, I'm going to do something a little bit different for the channel in that I'm not going to talk about a specific teaching or learning skill. I'm going to talk about the architecture of collaboration and really how it's evolved over the past few years. And this is really focused more on the Microsoft stack. So this video is aimed more at students that are taking my technology infrastructure courses, or it's aimed at people that are interested in knowing the different ways that people collaborate using Microsoft products, because it's going to be an important thing to know so that we can bring people into the best fit for their organization, which generally speaking is a more modern way of doing things, whereas a lot of people are kind of stuck in the past. I guess it's kind of a geek history lesson. And it also came about because of a subscriber question, really a compare and contrast between Microsoft Teams and Microsoft SharePoint. So I'm going to address that in this video. So it's more of an architectural lecture, it's more of a historical lecture into the modern world, and hopefully that's interesting or useful to you. If it is, hit the like button. And if you want more videos on teaching and learning, you can hit subscribe. Not all videos will be architectural overviews like this one, but I do think this is important to know so that when we are learning skills, we can be learning them with a purpose. We understand the context of where those skills and those technologies fit in an overall organizational, school, academic collaboration scenario. Whether that's a teacher collaborating with students, whether that's staff members collaborating with each other, or in an organization, whether it's project team members collaborating. It's important to understand what our options are and how they've evolved over time. Let's go have a look. I'm going to use the Microsoft whiteboard because I like to doodle while I talk about this stuff. So I'm going to draw, very crude images. Let's go have a look.
Oh yeah, welcome to the wonderful world of computer collaboration architecture. So I guess the first thing I should say is I've been around computers for a long time. So when I was younger, to give you an idea, the first real computer that I worked on was programming Fortran 77 on a Univax. So that should give you an idea that I'm ancient. Not super ancient, but ancient enough. Anyways, the very beginning at computers, collaboration really wasn't, what things were about. It was really about a computer operator that would work on a computer program, and that operator would then generate written reports or printed reports out for some sort of audience. And the interaction, the collaboration, was really a human collaboration, and there was a specialist who talked to the computer. And then, as we know, there was an entire revolution that occurred called the personal computer revolution. And again, that was just an individual working with their computer in order to do some stuff. And I'll get through all this pretty quick here. And what would happen is that individual would save all of their work in files, and usually that was either on some sort of external media like a floppy disk, or later on they would save their files on smaller disks or on a hard drive. But the point is that we had individual operators working with the computer. Collaboration was done outside of the technology. This makes more sense as I'll move on in a little bit here. And then what happened was we started building computer networks where we started connecting computers together. And of course, as we started connecting computers together, that meant that this operator might have a file that they want to share with this operator of a computer. So you could take the floppy disks and you could walk it over to this person, and it's affectionately known as sneaker net because you'd be wearing sneakers when you did it. And then we wound up getting some technologies that allowed us to share these computers together through a network. And to give you an idea, again, I became a certified Novell administrator. So Novell was a company that did a lot of personal computer networking, and now it allowed me to communicate. And then many, many years ago, to continue my epic journey of being an older guy, I also was part of something called a bulletin board service. And the bulletin board service was basically a service where you could dial in with your phone, your modem, so you'd have a modem, and you would dial in with your personal computer, you would connect up, you would dial in using your modem to connect to the modem of the bulletin board service, and here was a place where you could go and download files, and you could work with other people, and this was a form of collaboration, which was used for grabbing files, a lot of times drivers and patch files for your personal computer, or a lot of times it was just for having fun, playing adventure games, downloading different files. Then, of course, we have the birth of the internet. So the internet comes out, and the internet was used in academia for academic collaboration. But the idea is that really all the internet is a bunch of different computers connected to each other, a lot of times academic mainframes. And then what we would do is we would come in again with our personal computer. We would use our modem. We would dial into a modem that would allow me to get access to the appropriate resource. And in fact, I was a member of a long time ago. There was the first public node on the internet was called the Whole Earth Electronic Link. And I was a member of that. And this normally took the form of me on my personal computer dialing in, downloading a bunch of files that had a bunch of text conversations in them, making changes and commenting on that text, and then loading it back up. So that's kind of the real old history of collaboration using personal computers, the evolution of bulletin board services, and then into the internet. Now, as the internet goes, we all of a sudden got this large collection of computers out there called web servers, and people became very adept at using their personal computers and personal devices in order to connect to the internet and retrieve images, text, video from the internet. And then we also saw that they could go and they could put things on the internet. So there was this two-way collaboration here. And if I made changes here, you could come up and see those changes. And we were starting to collaborate. Now, in a corporate environment or an academic environment, we would also put special computers down in our basement, and those special computers were called servers. And the most common type of server that we had was something called a file server. And as the name would imply, it served files. So what would happen is here I would have a directory of files, and in that directory of files, I would have permissions to access certain files, and I would then go in with the computer, my workstation, my personal computer. My workstation would come in through the network. I would navigate the file system. I would have files that I would have on my computer. There was all sorts of work involved in terms of synchronizing these files from my personal workstation to the centralized file server, back and forth. And to give you an idea, like I said, I was a Novell administrator. One of those file servers that we used to use was called Novell NetWare. And we would have this file server there. And in order to make it easier for my user, who wasn't going to be a computer operator, they were just going to use a computer in their job, what I would do is I would do something called a drive mapping. So I would do something like on their computer, they would see something that would appear to be this H drive, or something that would be the M drive, or whatever letter I had. And when they saved their file into this drive, they thought they were saving it here, but in fact it was magically going into the file server. And then if another user came in, they would also be mapped to the H drive, and what would happen is they would see the file. So here I could have, for example, maybe there is accounts payable or accounts receivable, and I have accounts payable. I could have a situation where, they could share files with each other. Or instead of accounts receivable, let's say I have somebody here is wrong pen there. Let's erase this. Let's say I had somebody here like a purchasing agent. So I have somebody who goes and they purchase something. They fill out the form. It automatically goes to the H drive. It goes to the file server. Accounts payable goes down to the H drive, brings up the file that this person created. They approve it, put it back to there. So we're now collaborating between these two individuals by having a common file server. And there is a lot involved in that. And a lot of organizations still have centralized file servers because there were a lot of applications that were written to take advantage of this scheme. And people are still using those applications. And there was a lot of ways to synchronize file servers over geographic distances. So this has not gone away, but it's not really the most efficient way of collaborating. Now, at the heart of all new collaborations, this still exists. It's just not as evident to the user that that's what's happening. In the same way that I created a layer of abstraction by creating a mapped drive so the user doesn't have to know that they're using a file system, I can create other layers of abstraction. So let's look at one of the earliest ways of doing this. If I have something that's easy for people to use, let's call it web browsing. It's not very hard for people to do web browsing, is it? People know how to browse the web. If I say, oh, take this file and save it to the file server, they're like, that's magic. I don't know computers. I know accounts payable. But if I say, go to this web page and click this button, they're like, yeah, sure. And then in the background, what's happening is when they go to this browser on their computer and they make a change on it, it actually gets stored on a file somewhere. And as far as they're concerned, their only interaction is with the web page. So they're interacting with the web page, and behind the scenes, it's going to a file server. Well, that's called and that's the public internet. If I want to create my own internet of sorts, I can make this an intranet. And an intranet is basically just an internal internet. So instead of allowing the public to come in here, so we don't allow the public to come in here, but we allow employees to come in here. That's called an intranet. Now, to make the management of those intranets easier and more effective, companies like Microsoft came out with products that were intranet-centric. And what that meant is they created something called portal servers. And this was an entire system where a lot of the pre-configured web pages were there for things like a document library, right? A document library or a task list or all sorts of different functionality that was all presented to the user as a intranet portal. Now, what happened here was Microsoft had a portal server. In fact, it was called Microsoft Portal Server, but they changed the name of that portal server. They called it SharePoint. So Microsoft's portal server was called SharePoint. Now remember, while they were building this SharePoint server, people were still collaborating using file systems. Other people were collaborating using other intranet software, but people were using map drives. So SharePoint comes out, it has all this functionality, and some companies are like, hey, let's take a look at that. So they get their IT department to install SharePoint. Now the thing with SharePoint is because it is a portal server, this configuration needs to be architected. You need to architect what modules you're going to expose within your portal, how they're going to run, what data sources and what file systems that they're connected to. This all has to be architected. And for a lot of people, they say, well, I don't really want to spend a lot of time architecting this until I know that it's going to be valuable. So let's do a trial. Let's just install a plain generic version of this and see if people like it. And what would happen in some cases is people would love it and they'd end up making it mission critical. But because it wasn't properly architected, sometimes things would break. They wouldn't work as they should because it wasn't really designed or thought out before they started presenting it to their users. So SharePoint, and I'll be upfront with you on this, some people love it and some people hate it because some people have had really good experiences with it and some people have had not so good experiences with it. So I remember going to a conference years and years ago, and there was this very clever fellow there, and what he said is, you know what, I'm going to architect the SharePoint. So let me architect the SharePoint. So I'll create a nice SharePoint environment here. And then what I'll do is instead of you installing SharePoint yourself on your premise, what I'll do is I will give you access to my architected SharePoint. And I'll give multiple companies access to this architecture. And I will separate them through security policies so the companies don't see each other. And each of these will be referred to as a tenant of my company. So you will be a tenant, you'll come down. Now all you have to worry about is making your users effectively collaborate with each other by going through my architecture, having things like, task lists, having things like document libraries, having everything here nice and secure and being a tenant. And that was such a good idea that Microsoft started doing this, and that is really what Office 365 is. So Office 365, which I think used to be called Microsoft Business Services, it really is, it's multiple products because it's the Office suite of products, of course, but it's also a SharePoint infrastructure. It's a well-architected SharePoint infrastructure, and it has things like storage, which they call OneDrive. So it's a place where everybody can store their own personal files and where they can share out those files with other people and where people can share files with them. So we have all these cool ways of dealing with storage in OneDrive. But beyond that, we also have shared document libraries. And beyond that, we have things like business analytics. So you can actually snap in a business intelligence center into SharePoint. You can do all sorts of cool things over in the SharePoint side yourself, or you can just activate those features in this beautifully well architected Office 365 environment, which is something that I was very excited when it came out. And I was very early on board with, business services first and then Office 365. And they've just added to this. They've put in things like ERP systems. So enterprise resource planning systems, which is the Microsoft Dynamics. And I don't want to go too far in the weeds here, but Microsoft has just started snapping in all sorts of cool stuff into this architecture. And then I can have a specialized administrator, work with that and make sure that my tenant has those features that are beneficial to me. And I think the most important thing, of course, is to make sure you're training your users on how to use those features, or your students. And it was much easier than having to architect the infrastructure. Now what we're doing is configuring an infrastructure and making sure that we have effectiveness in our end user training. So that was very cool. And it's very useful. And the next evolution is to take that Office 365 environment and make a very consolidated, unified front end to it. And this is what Teams is. And this is why I'm so excited about Teams. Because here, if I'm a user and I want to go to your OneDrive, I have to go to your OneDrive and get a file. I have to click on a link, get your file. I have to click on the document library to find it. It's not hard because you're really just browsing the web if it's well architected. However, you are jumping from website to website and you can kind of get lost in that confusion. By having Teams where everything is in a channel and everything is linked, what you're doing is giving this one unified platform. And it's also been improved because it has things like voice. So you have things like Skype. Everybody, where's Skype these days? Well, Skype is actually in Teams now. And where do we meet? Where are we going to have a meeting? Well, we don't have to add in a meeting functionality here. We can just put the meeting into Teams. So this becomes this great singular viewpoint of where I can see all of the collaboration features I want. So it's really the next evolution. So we see that, we have all the way back here from a computer operator doing the work for me, all the way to a file server, then my own internal web environment, my intranet, then a portal server that makes that intranet more effective, then all the way to Office 365, which is a cloud-based SharePoint collaboration environment, well architected, and then this beautiful front end, which is Teams, which is what we're seeing now. And this is just getting better and better. I just I just attended an online conference where they talked about some of the new features that are coming to Teams. It's just amazing all the things we can snap into this one place. So now, in terms of collaboration, my user doesn't have to go hunting. They just come into work, come into their class, whatever they're doing, online, at geographic distance, in their office, whatever the case may be, they go to the team site, and if they're a member of several teams, maybe there's several team sites, each with, based upon a project, based upon a classroom, based upon some sort of collaboration, but they go into this one team environment and they can see everything they need to collaborate across all of them. And I'm not going to speak out of turn. I have no idea what Microsoft's plans are for the future, but if I was going to guess, I'm going to think that they're going to use a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning so that the user will be received more of a guided service through the environment. So the user will say, maybe in natural language, where is the file that will, where is the HR file for vacation? And it will search where it needs to go in order to bring that to the user. So, and without going again too deep into the weeds here, there are sort of some philosophical architectural ideas that some people view file system as collaboration. Some people view messaging as collaboration. Some people view data as collaboration. It's really all of these things can be used by exchanging files, exchanging messages, and exchanging data. Those are all ways that we can collaborate. But anyways, that's a conversation for another time, or maybe when we're in class together one of these days again. So you can see here that that's sort of the way that I see things evolving, and that's where you can see the difference between the growth of collaboration and how it's become much easier for this user to just go to one place and get everything they need. Now, just a quick add-on to this as well is that even though there is that evolution that I've sort of outlined, and I should say that's the way that I see things. There may be people that have other opinions on terms of how collaboration has evolved over time, but that's my opinion. And one of the things that we do see is nobody lives in one area exclusively. That's very rare. So for example, even though I might use Microsoft Teams as my main collaboration portal for my students, sometimes I email them. And that's really not what I should be doing. I should be sending emails to get their attention or to notify them of something that's happening, but that email should really not contain any documents. It should contain a link that brings them back to Teams, that brings them back to the SharePoint site, that brings them back to a file system. So, the way that people collaborate will be using many of these different technologies. And sometimes people, if they're comfortable with one, they'll stick to it. So attaching a document to an email is not uncommon. Or putting something in a shared file folder like a OneDrive or a Box or a some of these internet storage things. People do this all the time. So people will say to me, "Hey, can you get me that file? Can you put it into a Dropbox?" And the answer is yes, I can. And that puts it into a cloud-based storage so you can come and get it. But are we really collaborating on the file? Because once you get that file, if you make changes to it, do I know you've made those changes? And some people say, well, let's go up and let's collaborate on a file together in the cloud. And Google Apps is a good example of that. You can do the exact same thing with the Microsoft apps as well. So you could have a collaborative session working on a Word document or a project file or a PowerPoint presentation where you have multiple people providing input to that presentation in real time. But I think it's better to go through Teams. So that being said, even though I say some people, sometimes that some people is me. And I will actually send a document through email. And every time I do that, after I send that document through email to 12 people, I think to myself, oh no, I just went back to 1998. I went back to 2003 because that's how we collaborated in 2003. What I should have done is I should have posted that document into the Files tab of Teams, and then I should have sent everybody a link so they could all come into Teams and grab that file and look at it within the Teams environment. So, the big thing is to understand that not everybody is going to be using this apex way of collaboration. But what can we do? Let's try to get them there. Let's try to get them to this new way of collaborating. Let's get them to this modern workplace. Let's get them to a way that has much more efficiency, security, and functionality.
As promised, that was a bit of a architectural or a theoretical type of video, and I hope that that was still interesting and that you like that type of overview so that you really have context for all of the many other things that I go through on this channel. If you are interested in some specifics of how to use these collaboration tools, especially Microsoft Teams, which is the most modern one, then you can check out some of my other videos on the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and share this video with other people so that we can get more and more people collaborating in positive, impactful ways. Thank you again.